Okay, so this part deals with simplifying radicals. In this case, it's really just square roots. That's what we're dealing with, square roots. So let's look at this example as we go through this. Now, this is basically a review. We talked about this in the last class period and the class period before that. So let's just kind of see how much of this you remember. So number one, and let's suppose number one we had 7x times the square root of 100, x to the 8th power, y to the 10th power. So the discussions and the understanding came from a previous class period. But remember when the best way to do this, the best way to do these problems that look like this is to actually rewrite them. So this is 7x, and then you have this radicand here, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this as the square root of each of those factors. So the square root of 100 times the square root of x to the 8th times the square root of y to the 10th. And then you got to remember some things we've talked about. So I get 7x, and then you're going to simplify each of those square roots. What's the square root of 100? So that's times 10. Do you remember what the square root of x to the 8th is? X to the 4th. Because remember, all you did was just rewrote as rational exponents. You said 8 divided by 2 is 4. So it's x to the 4th. And then the square root of y to the 10th is just y to the 5th. Okay? But you didn't leave your answer like this, remember, because you know that you also remember some properties from a previous course. That when you multiply, remember the product rule, that when you multiply like bases, what do you do with those exponents? You add them, so it's x to the 5th. So you're going to use the same idea here. So, first of all, what's 7 times 10? So I get 70. What's x times x to the 4th? X to the 5th. And then you're left with y to the 5th. So that will be the answer. But again, notice the steps we went through. You need to rewrite your original problem like that if you have to. Number 2. We have 4x cubed y to the 5th times the square root of 81 x cubed y to the 12th. So 4x cubed y to the 5th times the square root of 81 x squared y to the 12th, x cubed y to the 12th. So just like before, rewrite the square root expression. So I get 4x cubed y to the 5th, and then I'm going to say times the square root of 81 times the square root of x cubed times the square root of y to the 12th. Okay, and then I'm going to simplify as much as possible each of those square roots. So I get 4x cubed y to the 5th. Now the square root of 81, all of you know, is 9. Now let's talk about the square root of x cubed. Let's see if you remember how to do that. So first of all, let's rewrite x cubed. And so you're going to say the square root of, and then how did you rewrite x cubed? Do you remember? X squared times x. So what you said was since my index is 2, we only deal with square roots here. Since my index is 2, you asked yourself, what's the largest whole number less than 3 that is divisible by 2? And you said 2. And it kind of makes sense because x squared times x is what? X cubed. But what is the square root of x squared? X. So this becomes x what? Yeah, so I was trying to skip a step here, but apparently for some of you that wasn't a good idea. So do y'all agree that this right here is the square root of x squared times the square root of x? What is the square root of x squared? So you left x and what? Square root of x. That's this right here. What is the square root of y to the 12? Y to the 6. All right, so that's where I'm at. Now again, don't leave your answer like that. You can go ahead and multiply some of these out. What's 4 times 9? All right, what's x cubed times x? X to the fourth. What's y to the fifth times y to the sixth?
Y to the 11.
And what's left? The square root of x. Okay. All right, number 3. You have negative 3xy times the square root of 44 x squared y to the 16th. Negative 3xy times the square root of 44 x squared y to the 16th. Again, if you need to, you write in those steps. So what you need to do is you need to say, well, that's going to be 3xy, and then rewrite that square root as a product of square roots. So that'll be the square root of 44 times the square root of x squared times the square root of y to the 16th. So if you have to do that, then you do that. And now we're going to simplify each of those square roots. So I get negative 3xy. Now let's talk about the square root of 44. 44 is not a perfect square like the others were, but I can simplify the square root of 44 because what perfect square goes into 44? 4. So that's 4 times 11. And what's the square root of 4? So that's 2 square root of 11. So that's what this is. I'm going to put 2 square root of 11 right here. Now what's the square root of x squared? That's just x. And what's the square root of y to the 16th? Y to the 8th. Are you going to be answered like this? No, because you know you can multiply some of those factors. First of all, negative 3 times 2 is a negative 6. Now what about your factor x? It'll be x to what power? Second, because x times x, x squared. What about your y? Y to the 9th, because y to the 1st times y to the 8th is y to the 9th. And all you're left with is the square root of 11. All right, one more.
Excuse me, x negative 6x is not a square.
Yes, I forgot to put the squared. Thank you. So x times x, x squared, right? All right, so x squared. All right, number 4. You have 2x times the square root of 18 x squared y to the 5th. That's a y. So 2x times the square root of 18 x squared y to the 5th. Again, the same process. Rewrite that square root. So I get 2x times the square root of 18 times the square root of x squared times the square root of y to the 5th. And now you simplify each of those square roots. So I get 2x. Now let's talk about the square root of 18. 18 is not a perfect square, but what perfect square goes in 18? All right, so it'll be square root of 9 times 2. And what's the square root of 9? So I agree that's 3 square root of 2. Okay, so that's just this right here. So times 3 square root of 2. Square root of x squared is easy. Well, that's just what? X. All right, now the square root of y to the 5th is not as easy because 5 is not divisible by 2. So we have to simplify that. So the square root of y to the 5th, always use the largest exponent. So how can I rewrite y to the 5th?
Y to the 4th.
Y to the 4th times y. And what's the square root of y to the 4th? So you get y squared, square root of y. So y squared, square root of y. So that's where I'm at. One more step and you're done. So let's talk about the factors that are numbers. So 2 times 3 is 6. X times x is x squared. And then the y squared, right? All right, good. Because you see, you had the square root of 2. You had the square root of 2, and you're multiplying by the square root of y. And that's just the square root of 2y. Okay? All right, so that should take care of that worksheet. That's this one right here. So go ahead and take out 15.2 part D. So you should now be able to do that one. Okay?